I'm Andrea Earl, and welcome to the Building Classroom Community Podcast. This is the show where we talk about all aspects of building community among the learners in your classroom so that every student feels welcome, safe, empowered, and heard. In this episode, I'm going to talk with Jeremiah Ruesch about why words matter. Let's get started.
This is part one of our conversation.
Hi, I'm here today with Jeremiah Ruesch. I know Jeremiah because he is the co-author of the EduProtocols Field Guide Math Edition. But Jeremiah, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey in education?
Absolutely. A long, short version. I was in grad school and was looking to be something. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And I got burnt out in school. And so we were in Idaho at the time, and my wife's family lives back here in California. And so I told her when we were done with my educational journey, wherever that was going to take us, that we would come back to settle, and so she could be close to her family. And it just so happened that my mom had was a vice principal at a local high school, and they needed a math teacher. And so the Kismet cloud kind of aligned. I had done tutoring and that kind of thing in college and in high school, and I enjoyed it, but I wasn't sure that that was something that I wanted to do. And then when I was teaching in grad school, the question of like how we learned and like how could a student get to college level, right, with this like, for instance, in high school. So I had 18-year-olds, fresh out of high school, and then I had a lot of returning students coming in um, that were expressing different abilities in different areas, but we're struggling, and but the struggle was still real for both of them, right? And so I just got to this point where that totally looked like you were giving me the like, well, figures sound great. Um, but they were like having a hard time kind of figuring things out. And so I just kind of wondered like how, like, for the returning students, it made a lot more sense that they'd been away from school for a while, so they had some struggles remembering or trying to recall how to do certain things, because especially in mathematics, right, you don't get this bicycle kind of analogy where you go for a while and then you learn how to, like, it comes back to you with relative ease. It usually, maybe concepts do, but like individual skills don't. So all of this to say that that kind of got me sparked on this idea of like, well, how do we learn? And that kind of like started that curiosity. And so like when the idea of being a teacher came up, except for the fact that teaching kids scared me to death, like the idea of being in charge of a room full of young adults was just something that at that time was very intimidating, and still scary. Don't get me wrong, but it may be in a different way now. And so I took the job and came into teaching. And my first year of teaching, I think as many new teachers experience, was really difficult. But I found that I actually made a lot of connections, and I really enjoyed that opportunity, and that the day to day, like every day was different. There was just a lot of it was a lot of fun. There was a lot of energy and stuff like that. So I gave it another year, and just ended up having a much better experience with my second year. And it really honed in on that question that I had in my head, which was like, how do you get to this point in your life? Like, how do we learn and how do we understand things? And so that really started in this drive in me to like understand that, but also like, how do you teach math better, and how can you become a better educator? And it's such a powerful role and a gift that we have in this idea that we get to spend this time with kids in their formative years and kind of shaping the next generation. And it's a both an occupation, but it's also a way of life in a way, and it also is one of the most important jobs we can do as humans. And so it's such a giving thing, but it also takes a lot out of you. So uh, it's been a journey of mine to figure out this idea of how do we learn, and then also like how do we make math more equitable? How do we include more voices at the table? How do we do all these things? So um, my journey is along those routes. So after high school teaching for a while, I went into kind of like a district admin sort of role, and was doing curriculum, and that really was expanding my own viewing lens from this narrow, high school level and college at that point, down to kindergarten through K-12. And that gave me great opportunities and access to understanding. And then teaching, my first time ever teaching undergrad, or like a lower division, like elementary primary school, experience was in second grade, and that was just like I had never been more nervous for anything in my life. And then giving that lesson and having the success that I had just really launched this um, desire to learn more, and it really helped to see the whole picture in a much different way. And so after that experience, I was at a county office level, figuring out how do systems work within districts, and then now at my current level, I'm at the college level, and I get to work kind of in both fields. So it's kind of, if I could write a dream job, it would be this, right? I get to both work with teachers and teach teachers and explore and explain, and um, you know, I'm still active in the classroom. In fact, I was just in the classroom today, in seventh and eighth grade. Um, and then also getting to teach undergraduate math. And so I get to be a practitioner of the craft, but also get to learn and work with, other practitioners. And so it's like this great blending of the two worlds. And so for that perspective, it's been really nice to kind of like sit back and look at my 20 years in education and go, like, what lessons have I learned, and what things am I still, still have lots of things to learn, which it's hard to believe after 20 years, but it's definitely true. It's humbling and exciting and everything. So that brings me to my current state. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, you're we always have more to learn, right? And teachers that
Yeah.
have that growth mindset, that we're always looking for new ways to engage our students and improve our practice. We're the ones that are still happy and enjoying what we do, right?
Mhm. I was just thinking, it's true, and one of the things that, like for me, I was cognizant about, my mentor kind of was warning me about, was that because I am very passionate and I'm very curious, that like you're saying, it's very very impactful, right? And being a reflective educator helps you to improve and grow in your craft.
Mhm.
The downside or the danger of that is that a lot of passionate teachers and passionate people in general, they tend to burn out quickly, right? So there's this balance of how do you keep the passion there, keep the curiosity, keep the growth going, at the same time, um, not letting the weight of the system that grinds the daily in and out, right? There's a video I love to share with people called "This Is Water." It's a graduation commencement speech, that a poet gave back in like 2010. And then the very opening sequence, like the first 30 seconds, there's two fish swimming along, and I don't want to ruin the punchline, but the bottom line is that fish swim in water, right? And the idea that if you don't understand it, or if you don't see it, or if you don't if you never brought awareness to it, right, you don't know. And that really became aware in my own journey, as when I was getting comfortable at teaching high school, I could easily have been there doing that now, and doing the same thing, the same routine in and out. And that, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but for me, that would have been like a comfort zone, and I would have not been willing to elevate or to innovate my education. So one thing I knew about me was that I have to keep moving and
Mhm.
keep learning. Otherwise, stagnicity, if that's a word, I'm going to make it a word. If that's a thing, like getting stagnant for me is where. So I'm constantly having to keep moving, and I think that um, keep learning and that kind of thing. That's what kind of keeps my bucket filled, and I seek out communities where that learning is happening. So
So it's kind of similar to my own story. I've held many different positions. I also taught middle school math for about 20 years, sixth
yeah,
and seventh grade, a little science, mixed in, and
nice.
exploratory and other things. But then I've been out of the
Yeah,
classroom and then back in the classroom. I taught elementary for a number of years, different grade levels.
nice.
But you're right, the more you change it up, then you don't get stagnant. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that some teachers kind of get stuck. You get stuck in a place, or you're scared to change schools or change grades, or because it's something
Mm-hmm.
new. But it can be the impetus to keep you fresh you know and happy, really.
Yeah,
And it adds a
yeah.
little.
I think that's a great idea, and like you're saying too, I think also having that ability to teach at different levels, right? It helps you to become a better educator, in the sense that you learn how to meet different needs of different age groups. You learn how to differentiate. You learn how uh, you learn different strategies that, even though they work across the grade levels, the way that you interact with them and the way that students have opportunities to see or access things can make a huge difference in their ability to understand, or their ability to grasp or grapple with difficult content, which we teach in this math and science world. So
Absolutely. Which kind of
yeah.
brings us to our topic for today. So
Yeah.
I read a recent blog post that you wrote where you talked about in an interaction you had with a student and how you just switched up the question, the way you questioned a student, and you got a
Mhm.
totally different result. And
Yeah.
I just think that's fascinating because personally I'm very intentional in my speech with students. And I have to be careful when I have like a student teacher that I pull back the curtain and explain why I'm using certain words or certain patterns. Um, and
Mhm.
it's kind of apropos that we're meeting today because this happens to be National Words Matter Week. So that was kind of cool. And it kind of,
Yeah.
I know you didn't plan that when you wrote your post, but it just kind
Not
of
at all.
worked out. Um,
Yeah.
so quick, a little history on Words Matter Week, and then we want to hear your story about what you did with that student.
Yeah.
So, Words Matter Week started in 2008, and it was founded by the National Association of Independent Writers and Editors. So, this is an international group, and their goal is to seek and promote opportunities and employment for people who make a living with words. Um, so, I just thought that was kind of cool that we as teachers, we make our livings with words, right? So, can
Mhm.
you tell us a little bit about the story that you shared in your blog post and how the way we frame questions and interact with students can change the way we build community with them?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So this was a story that it kind of it was a couple of years kind of morphed into a timeline with a particular student. And so my first year teaching, I was teaching a class, and think of it like a remedial algebra kind of class, right? So it was a class where students had difficulties or challenges in math, and there was always a um level of like disengagement coming into the space due to previous um, you know successes or versions of themselves that had not allowed them to be successful in the class. And so I had one particular student who I really connected with on a personal level, uh, but I could never get him to engage in any of the lessons that we were doing. And so I'd always ask him, because I'm a big fan of like having like I saw the power of it as a tutor. I see the power of it, when you're talking to students, like when they're able to share with each other. I knew that they were able to communicate better than me telling them, right? Coming from that perspective. And so I was trying to get him to do a problem, and I kept asking him, which one, um, or do you want to do a problem? I kept asking him, hey, well, would you do this problem? And I finally had the goal one day to actually ask him if he would do the problem in front of the class. Now, mind you, he would do the problems like in his space, but he would do them on his own time, and he was usually right. Like he just didn't have the confidence, and he was a big kid. He wasn't tiny, so I was a little afraid of him at the time because I was still kind of new to this whole world of like being the adult in the room, which is a different journey in and of itself. And so I walked up to him, and I was like, hey, do will you do this problem in front of the class? And not expecting him to say no. And he just looked at me, and he kind of like quietly stared up at me like this, and he's like, no. And I was like, it's to say no. So I was like, it didn't register in my mind that that was a thing. And so I was like, are you sure? And I actually had like, imagine that this is the like the chalk, right? I was like, are you sure? He's like, no. And I was like, oh, and so I have a class of 30 kids just staring at this interaction, and I'm like, I can feel my face turning red, and I didn't know what to do at that moment. And so I was like, okay, thanks. And then I just kind of walked away, and like that was this like moment where I realized in my teaching that there was a way that I'm communicating that wasn't reaching the kids, right? Like I was, and so I didn't know it at the time, uh, but it started the seed of this idea of like how we communicate and what we say matters, right? This idea that words lead to actions, words are ideas that communicate concepts, feelings, emotions, and up to this point, I never really had thought about the impact of words or how we phrase things or how we connect with things. And so a little while later, I was in a different class with the same student. I was learning, and had a little bit more experience under my belt, and I still asked the same question, right? I still wouldn't say, uh, do you want to do X, Y, or Z, right? And he was the only kid that ever said no, right? Like, so I was like, maybe it's just this one time thing. And so I got up the courage one day, and I was going to have him do a problem, and the words that came out were different. And so as I was going up to him, I said, um, "Which one do you want to do?" Was the way that I phrased the question to him, and he looked at me and he goes, and he said which one he was going to do, and then he proceeded to do the problem and explained it and everything like that. And like for me, it was just this like overwhelming like shock of like, whoa, what just happened here? Because like that was not the expectation that had been set, from previous experience. And I didn't understand at that moment, but as I was reflecting on it after the lesson, like first of all, I was just really ecstatic that like the student was like, uh, because he's one of the students that commands respect in the room, right? And so the fact that he was willing to engage in a lesson was a big deal, just in general. But then also the fact that the way that it went down with a lot of the students that were in my previous class, having them say no there and then having them say yes here, right? Marks a big difference as well. And so it was one of those first wins as a teacher that you experience where you just kind of go, oh, maybe this is a good thing, right? Maybe this is a thing where positive outcomes can happen. And as I was reflecting on it, what I realized over the time was that the word choice, right, and the word phrasing, one of them has this veiled option to opt out, whereas the other one has an implication that you are going to do one. That's the expectation. There's no opt out option. What you do get to decide is which of the options are you going to choose, right? So the difference in which one do you want to do versus would you like to do one, right? Like those are very, very different, even though the wording itself is very similar. And so I think that connection is something we so often, uh, if we're not purposeful or if we don't have those experiences in the language that we use or the words that we're using to communicate for students to elicit an action, an understanding, a connection. Um, they can they can often be either missed opportunities or opportunities that have outcomes, like in my first situation, which you may not have anticipated, right? Or may, in some sense, like discredit you as an authority figure, or may communicate that you don't necessarily believe in a student's abilities and stuff like that. And so I see this often even in the way that we communicate. Uh, the teachers, the deeper version of this goes, uh, I'm going to do these problems for you. And what that you're communicating is that you don't think that the student's capable of doing those things, right? And so it's not explicit, but as human beings, we tend to internalize that and go, "Oh, my teacher doesn't expect me to do this because they don't think I can or I'm capable of." And it's like I'm really into this design of what are these little changes, these little tweaks that we're doing as educators, right? That communicate or have big impact on something, um, that we can, if we're aware of them, we can utilize them without changing our day to day. Without We have so many decisions we make every day, and there's so many things on our plate, anyways. But how can we leverage these ideas to really uh, get the outcomes that we're hoping to get without having to spend hours on hours of like remediation or bumping heads with each other because we're expecting this but communicating this, right? And those are at war with each other instead of aligning together. So that was really what the heart of the post that I wrote was.
So yeah, that really resonated with me because I try very hard when I'm asking students questions, like you said, to not put them in a corner, right?
Mm.
I don't want to ask a student a question. I don't want to do this gotcha. I know a lot of teachers, especially intermediate, middle school, they do the popsicle stick thing. Don't do the popsicle stick thing. That's so uncomfortable. Um,
Yeah.
but it puts students in a corner, it puts them on the spot. It's kind of like, I gotcha because you're not paying attention. Or, if you're having students read or answer questions and you call on that one student is not paying attention, that's just the total opposite of building community. instead of saying, as you're having the class discussion, walking up to that student and saying, hey, I'm going to call on you in, 2 minutes. Think of an idea you want to share.
Hmm.
Right. So, like you said, giving the student choice, prepping them right before they have to speak, but then giving them that comfortable space to speak in, um, I think makes a lot of difference. But
Absolutely.
even the questions we ask kids, I came back, we had a staff meeting right after winter break, and the question was, where did you go on your break? And I was like, I didn't go anywhere. I stayed home. I didn't have the money to go anywhere. People went
Right.
to, all these places. And we have to be careful. It was a total turnoff to me. I totally
Mhm.
disengaged from the rest of the meeting because I was like, I felt put on the spot.
Yeah.
Some of us meaning well, we ask students those kinds of questions, right?
Hmm.
Where did you go? What did you do? And
Hmm.
not realizing that, or not taking into account their experiences are very different from our
Yeah.
own.
It's a really valid point, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I think um, one thing that the pandemic definitely taught me in this world, we were doing a lot of virtual learning experiences. Those questions, because in my lesson sequence, like I've internalized those, right? So
Mhm.
I have a warm welcome, I have a brain and transition activity, and then I have a optimistic closure for every lesson, right? So that's kind of a routine in how I plan my day from Castle 5 practices, right? And so I think about that a lot. And my buddy Ed Campos, which most people probably have heard the name or know him, we would talk about this intentionality, and he was able to tap into resources where that exact point you brought up really brought home and resonated with the questions that we ask and the hidden expectations that brings into play, right? Like you said, I think that's the perfect example of, like, where did you go? So what is that anticipating? That you had vacation, you had the time and money and the opportunity to go, yeah, access and the privilege that's encountering, right? And the things that brings to the foreground. I live in a very rural area relative to most of California, right? It tends to be very high economically, socially disadvantaged, and so there's a lot of challenges in this area about what things kids have access to, what things uh, as a community, like who's being represented in the classroom and who's being represented outside of the classroom. Like there's all of these different layers of things that we tend not to pay attention to, and because we're not paying attention to them, and because we're not using language that is inclusive or bringing in, and so letting the kids see themselves, letting the kids hear themselves, like these
Mhm.
inclusive practices, there's a lot of disengagement, there's a lot of struggle, there's a lot of challenges with even just behavioral kinds of things, because
Mhm.
if you don't feel like you belong in the space, right, or if you don't see yourself in the space, then why would you want to join that club, right? Like, you're not being inclusive, you're not trying to value me as a human being or my experiences, right? Or you're not providing an opportunity where I can adapt to something I've lived or I've experienced, right? And so I think all of those things that you just brought up, or what I heard or what I understood from what you just brought up. So I really appreciate your story and sharing that with me. So thank you.
But you're right. We have to value our students' experiences, and we know,
Mhm.
like you said, through the pandemic, we learned a lot about our students and a lot about.
Mhm.
I think it really pulled back the window, the veil. I think
Mhm.
on what they're experiencing, regardless of their economic background, right, or social, wherever they live, and that our students, they bring a lot to the table, but they also have a lot that they're dealing with. And just kind of reminds me of I was talking to some news teachers, and one of the teachers was having trouble with a student who was misbehaving in class. And so I went to observe, and she was constantly, you need to pay attention, you need to be on task, you need to do the work,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
the kid he was having none of it. So we had a little conversation about how she could switch her language and the way
Mhm.
she interacted with the student to a more assets based approach.
Right.
Don't say that too fast. um
Yeah.
so she took some time over the next few days to get to know the student and find out a little bit more about him.
Mm,
And she was able to realize that there were things in his life that were preventing him from focusing
mhm.
in class. And then so she was then able to use some strategies to help him feel more comfortable in the space.
Yeah,
But, you know, her first inclination was, oh, he's just lazy. He doesn't want to do anything,
right.
you know.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a really good point. Absolutely. So was she able to like connect with the student then and resolve those issues or at least minimize them to some extent?
she was. It took a
Yeah.
while, and of course, because she hadn't built that trust initially with him, she had to kind of
Sure.
undo the negative trust,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But she was patient and she spent time and just start and all she did is she started talking to the student and saying, I'm so glad you're here in class today. It's nice to see you today. Thank you
Mm,
for coming. I really appreciate you.
mhm.
You know, what's I know you don't want to write anything. I can see that you're not wanting to write, but can you tell me one idea you have about the article? Right.
Nice.
And just having
Yeah.
him respond just a little bit. And then as he
Hmm.
grew more comfortable and realized that she was in his corner, right, supporting him and not attacking him because he couldn't sit still and focus,
Yeah. Yeah.
he
Right.
started opening up and then he did start producing. And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful story. It reminds me of as you're sharing, and like every time I'm just imagining a plant that's like just in thirsty for water, right? And so every time she's giving a little bit,
yeah,
right, she's giving him a little bit of water, and so it's just giving him the opportunity to like kind of first, recover, right, and
mhm,
have a space where he can be himself and feel a connection, and then he starts to produce, right, and then he starts to bloom and grow, and and that's like it's so powerful these connections that we can make, and like stories like that are what makes gives me goosebumps and like makes me like want to continue this work, and the connections with kids and the it's just it's so impactful, the journey, that the job that we do, and
mhm,
there's a lot of things about teaching that are very difficult and hard, and um, systems things that are almost designed to bring us to a pulp, right? Like there's almost
sometimes.
like um, but we're in the business of human beings, and if we can remember that, and if we can put our own stuff aside during in those moments, not all the time, we're human beings too, but just being able to recognize that the same things that we're needing our kids need, and
Mhm.
we don't know their background, we don't know their history, but we have to try to provide them as many opportunities and connections that we can, and that's a beautiful example what that can lead to, right?
Well, I love your analogy of the growing plant.
Thank you for joining us today. And remember, great classrooms are built on collaboration, empathy, and trust. As you go back to your classrooms, let's continue to foster environments where every student feels valued and supported. The words we choose can make a big difference in our classrooms. In our next episode, we will continue the conversation with Jeremiah, where he will share how he builds community in his classroom and with the teachers he supports. See you next time.